All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep, deep into, well, the anchoring effect.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those fascinating kind of sneaky things our brains do.
Yeah, definitely sneaky. Yeah.
Have you ever noticed how, like, the first piece of information you hear about something just kind of sticks with you,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
even if it's completely random or like irrelevant?
It's like it sets a baseline or something, and then you kind of judge everything else based on that, even when you know you shouldn't.
Exactly, that's anchoring in action, and it's way more powerful than you might think.
Oh, it totally is.
So, like, imagine someone's trying to sell you, like, a beat-up old bicycle, right?
Okay, yeah.
And they start by asking, like, $500 for it.
500.
Yeah, I know it's
It's
ridiculous.
outrageous.
But that number, even though it's crazy high, it's going to kind of stick in your head.
Oh, for sure.
And it's going to influence how much you're willing to pay, even if you know it's worth way less.
Exactly. You might end up feeling good about getting it for $100, thinking you got a bargain.
Right. When in reality, it's probably only worth, like, 20.
Yeah, you've been anchored.
Totally anchored.
Okay, so that's anchoring in a nutshell. But let's get into, like, the real nitty-gritty, the research behind it.
Okay, sounds good.
Where did all this anchoring stuff come from?
Well, some of the earliest research on this comes from psychology, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, back in the 1970s, these two researchers, Tversky and Kahneman, they were like pioneers in the field of behavioral economics, you know?
Okay.
They really started to explore this whole idea of cognitive biases, and anchoring was one of the big ones.
So how did they, like, study anchoring?
They did all sorts of clever experiments,
I bet.
but one of the classic ones involved asking people to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN.
Okay, how does that tie into anchoring?
Well, they had this Wheel of Fortune,
Oh, this is getting good.
and it was rigged to land on either 10 or 65, totally random numbers.
Oh, sneak. So they'd spin the wheel, and then they'd ask people, hey, do you think the actual percentage of African nations in the UN is higher or lower than whatever number the wheel landed on?
Wait, so they used a totally random number to influence people's guesses?
Exactly.
That's wild.
And here's the thing. Those who saw the wheel land on 10, they guessed, on average, that about 25% of African nations were in the UN.
Okay.
But get this. Those who saw 65, they guessed way higher, like around 45%.
Wow, that's a huge difference for something that was completely made up.
I know, right? It's like that random number, that anchor, it just totally skewed their perception.
It's like our brains just latch onto that first piece of info, even if it's totally bogus.
It's kind of like a mental shortcut. You know, our brains are trying to simplify things, but sometimes it leads to these irrational judgments.
So even when we know the information is irrelevant, it still anchors our thinking.
Yep, it's pretty crazy. And it's not just with, like, random facts and figures. It pops up in all sorts of important decisions.
Give me an example.
All right, so they did this other study with MBA students.
MBA students, okay.
Yeah, so they had these students negotiate the sale of a hypothetical pharmaceutical plant.
High stakes.
Yeah, exactly. And the researchers, they manipulated who made the first offer.
The buyer or the seller?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And what they found was when the seller went first and set a high anchor, that initial offer,
Uh-huh.
the final price ended up being way higher, millions of dollars higher, compared to when buyer made the first offer.
Billions.
Millions, yeah.
That's incredible.
I know, right? It shows you just how powerful that initial number can be, even for people who are supposed to be, savvy negotiators.
So even in these complex scenarios with people who should know better,
Yeah,
that first number can really mess things up.
it totally can. And the thing is, this isn't just limited to business deals or, hypothetical situations.
Right.
This bleeds into the real world big time.
Oh, I bet. And I'm guessing the consequences can be pretty serious.
Yeah, especially in areas like legal proceedings.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
All right, so buckle up, because next we're going to dive into how this anchoring effect can play out in the legal system.
Okay, I am ready to hear all about it.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
Welcome back to the deep dive into the anchoring effect.
So before the break, we were talking about how anchoring can really impact legal proceedings.
Right, especially in plea bargaining.
Plea bargains, okay, yeah.
That's where the stakes are really high,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about people's lives, their freedom.
Exactly. And the way anchoring comes into play is, well, prosecutors, they often start by offering a plea deal that's,
Pretty harsh.
yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
Like, they set a really high anchor, a tough starting point.
And that puts pressure on the defendant to accept it.
Yeah, especially if they don't have the best lawyer
Mhm.
or they're just feeling scared and overwhelmed.
So they might end up taking a deal that's not in their best interest.
Exactly. That's the worry. The anchoring could lead to unjust outcomes.
So what can be done about that? How do we prevent anchoring from, like, tipping the scales of justice?
Well, one idea that's been proposed is to get judges more involved in the plea bargaining process.
Interesting. So right now, it's mostly just the prosecutor and the defense attorney going back and forth.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you're thinking the judge could act as a kind of neutral third party.
Exactly. They could provide some perspective, some balance.
Okay, I like it.
So instead of just hearing that initial high anger from the prosecutor, the defendant would also get a sense of what a reasonable sentence range might be.
From the judge, right?
Exactly. It would give them more information to work with, help them make a more informed decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but of course, there are some concerns about this approach.
Oh, I bet. What are people worried about?
Well, some people worry that it could make the judge seem less neutral.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
If the judge is involved in the bargaining process, will defendants feel pressured to accept whatever sentence they suggest?
Right, like it's not really a suggestion anymore. It's coming from the judge.
Exactly.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, you want the judge to be involved, but not in a way that feels coercive.
And then there's also the practical side of things.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Judges are already super busy. If we add plea negotiations to their plate,
It could really bog down the system.
lead to delays, more backlogs, yeah.
So finding that sweet spot where judges can be involved without overwhelming the system or compromising their neutrality, that's the challenge.
A challenge for sure, but it seems like it could be worth it if it helps to level the playing field for defendants.
Absolutely. It's all about ensuring that justice is served fairly.
Okay, so judicial involvement is one potential solution, but what about on a more individual level?
Yeah, good question.
Are there things we can do, like in our own lives, to avoid falling prey to anchoring?
Absolutely. There are definitely strategies we can use.
Lay 'em on me.
All right. Well, first and foremost, slow down.
Slow down, okay?
Don't feel like you have to make a decision right away.
Yeah, especially when it's a big decision.
Right. Take your time, think things through.
Because when we rush, we're more likely to just go with that gut reaction.
And that gut reaction could be totally influenced by the anchor.
So step back, detach from that initial number.
Exactly. Give yourself some space to process the information more objectively.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
This one's important. Get multiple perspectives.
Okay, like getting a second opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Don't just rely on what one person is telling you, no matter how trustworthy they seem.
It's easy to get tunnel vision, especially if you're in a stressful situation.
Totally. So talk to different people, do some research on your own, get a wider view of this situation.
Because the more information you have, the better equipped you'll be to resist that anchoring effect.
Precisely. It's about challenging that initial anchor, not just accepting it as the gospel truth.
So it's about being proactive,
Yeah.
doing our own due diligence. This makes me think back to that study with the jurors in that age discrimination case.
Oh, yeah, right.
The ones who only heard the plaintiff's side, they were totally anchored to the damages they suggested.
But when they heard both sides, their judgments were way more balanced.
It's a perfect example of how broadening our perspective can help us break free from the influence of a single anchor.
It's powerful stuff, and it applies to so many areas of life.
All right, so slow down, get multiple perspectives. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Yeah, one more thing. Pay attention to your emotions.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, rushed.
Those are all times when we might be more vulnerable to anchoring, right?
Absolutely. When we're not thinking clearly, those mental shortcuts become even more tempting.
And anchoring is a big mental shortcut.
It is. So if you're feeling pressured, if you're not in the right headspace, it's best to postpone the decision if you can.
Give yourself some time to cool down, gather your thoughts.
Exactly. Come back to it when you're feeling more level-headed.
Because emotions can really cloud our judgment.
Oh, they totally can. And that's when anchoring can really sneak in and mess things up.
So it's all about self-awareness, recognizing when we might be particularly susceptible to these biases.
And then taking steps to protect ourselves.
Right, so we've got slowing down, getting different perspectives, being aware of our emotions. This is good stuff.
It is. And there's one more crucial element to mitigating anchoring: motivation.
Oh, interesting. How does motivation play into this?
Well, research has shown that when we're really motivated to be accurate,
Uh-huh.
we're much more likely to put in the mental effort to adjust away from that anchor.
So it's like we're kicking our brains into overdrive, really scrutinizing the information.
Exactly. And that extra effort can help us overcome that initial bias.
So if I really care about making the best decision, I'm more likely to resist the pull of that anchor.
Exactly. You'll be more willing to question it, to dig deeper, to find the truth.
Makes sense. And on the flip side, if we're not that invested in the decision, if we're just going through the motions,
Yeah, we're way more likely to just go with the flow, let that anchor dictate our thinking.
like in that study with the Mississippi River, right?
Yeah, the one where people had to estimate its length.
Those who were offered a cash reward for accuracy,
They were way more likely to adjust their estimates, to move further away from the anchor.
whether it was high or low.
It didn't matter. They were motivated to get it right.
Fascinating. So a little motivation can go a long way.
It can, and it shows that we're not just puppets of these cognitive biases.
We have the power to fight back.
We do, by understanding these biases and by being motivated to make good decisions.
I like it.
It's all about being aware, being strategic, and putting in that extra effort.
Well said. So we're back, and we've been talking all about the anchoring effect and how it can really mess with our decision-making.
It's a powerful bias, that's for sure.
And we were just talking about how being motivated to be accurate can help us resist those anchors.
Right. The more we care about getting it right, the more likely we are to put in the mental effort to overcome that initial bias.
So how do we actually do that? How do we make sure we're bringing our A game to those important decisions?
Well, one strategy is to really focus on why accuracy matters in that particular situation.
Okay, so like if I'm negotiating a salary for a new job,
Exactly.
I should remind myself what that extra money could mean.
For your financial goals, your future.
Right. Or if I'm buying a car, I need to remember that overpaying could have consequences.
It could mean having less money for other things you need.
That's like raising the stakes.
Yeah, reminding yourself that this decision has real-world implications.
This isn't just a game.
It's not, and that can really boost your motivation to make a smart choice.
Okay, so focus on the why. What else can we do?
Another thing is to really engage in that effortful processing.
Effort processing.
Don't just passively accept that initial anchor,
Question it.
Yeah, challenge it, look for information that might contradict it.
It's like being a detective.
It is. You got to ask yourself, where did this anchor come from? Is it even reliable?
What else should I be considering?
Exactly. By actively questioning the anchor, you can start to break free from its influence.
So be critical, be skeptical,
Don't just take things at face value.
and be prepared.
Oh, preparation is key.
Yeah, if you know you're going into a negotiation, do your homework.
Gather as much information as you can.
Anticipate those potential anchors.
And think about how you'll respond to them.
It's like having a game plan.
It is. If you know what to expect, you're less likely to be caught off guard.
That's great advice.
And by being prepared, you'll be in a much stronger position to resist those anchoring effects.
And make a decision that's truly in your best interest.
Exactly.
Wow, this deep dive has been eye-opening.
It's fascinating stuff, right?
It really is. I feel like I'm starting to understand how my brain works on a whole new level.
And how easily we can be influenced by these subtle biases.
Right. But the good news is, we're not helpless.
We're not, by understanding how anchoring works and by taking steps to mitigate its effects.
We can become better decision makers.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about, being empowered to make smarter choices.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Giving you the knowledge and the tools to navigate the complexities of, well, everything.
The world around us, yeah.
So, the next time you're facing a big decision, remember what we've talked about today.
Be aware of that anchoring effect.
Question those initial numbers. Take your time.
Think critically and get all the information you need.
Before you make that choice,
And until next time,
stay curious and keep diving deep.